Welcome back to my channel for another Leica episode, and this will be a lens review, and the lens I'm going to consider is the Leica APO-Vario-Elmarit-SL 90 to 280 mm, and the aperture is not a constant aperture but goes from f2.8 at the 90 mm setting and then stops down to f4 at 280 mm. The APO-Vario-Elmarit-SL 90 to 280 mm is the natural extension of the standard zoom on the Leica SL system, namely this lens here. And if you look quickly inside here, that's the Vario-Elmarit-SL, widest open f2.8, but again not a constant aperture, stops down to f4 at 90 mm, focal length 24 to 90 mm. So a typical standard zoom, but a bit longer than what you have in various other camera brands, where the standard zoom typically is a 24 to 70 mm. Here at Leica you get 90 mm as the longest focal length, but you also have a compromise. The aperture is not constant as just mentioned. The game plan for this video is simple. First, I want to quickly discuss the lens, want to provide the specifications of the lens, want to talk a little bit about autofocus performance. You see it's a massive lens. And then I want to show sample images. I was again shooting with Sabrina from Austria. We have some fantastic footage which I created with the 90 to 280 mm shot on my Leica SL2. And I was mainly focusing on portraits because 90 to 280 mm is good for sports and action, but also in particular excellent for portraits and fashion and beauty. Let's kick off the video. Let's have a closer look at the lens. And first of all, if I unmount the lens hood here, the lens appears a bit less voluminous because the lens hood really contributes here, but it is nevertheless a very long lens and it's also very heavy. So the weight of the lens is 1,710 gram, and it is quite some substantial weight you have in combination with the Leica SL2 in your hand. But shooting it is absolutely no problem because you have that very nice hand grip here on the Leica SL2, and you also can get your hands in between the tripod mount and the lens, and then you have a very solid grip here and can just zoom in or zoom out in the way you want to do it. The lens is very complex in its optical construction. So we have here 23 elements in 17 groups, and we also have a very large filter thread here. So this filter thread here is 82 mm. You see I have a protector on here, but this is always originally from Leica. If you have a bad protector or UV filter on top of a top glass, it will ruin the optical performance. So make sure if you want to protect it, you spend some bucks in getting the right protector. The lens is compatible with all L-mount camera bodies, so you can also shoot this lens on Sigma cameras or on Panasonic cameras, and it will work very well. Minimum focusing distance of the lens is the following. If you are at a focal length of 90 mm, the minimum focusing distance is 60 cm up to infinity, of course. If you are at the tele setting and you are at 280 mm, then the minimum focusing distance is 1.4 meter and again up to infinity. On the aperture side, in the same way as the smaller sister of the lens from 24 to 90 mm, I mentioned it before, is not a constant aperture. You start at widest open f2.8 at 90 mm, but then if you start zooming here from 90 mm all the way up to 280, the aperture automatically stops down to a widest open f4 at the tele setting here. The lens can also be used for macro or close-up shots. So at 90 mm, the largest magnification is 1 divided by 4.8, and at 280 mm, it's 1 divided by 5. So very close together in these two settings and getting close to 20%. So is also good for close-up shots. And you see this later in some of the portraits. I could get really close to the face of my model. And I think in general, the performance of this lens, as you will see in the sample images, is absolutely terrific. If you travel with that lens and a 24 to 90 mm, you cover a huge spectrum of focal length from 24 to 280 mm, which should carry you easily through any photographic situation you want to master. The lens has built-in optical image stabilization. As per standard, it's 3.5 stops, but it also works together, of course, with the in-body image stabilization of the Leica SL2, and in this way you can gain some stops if you want to keep the shutter open for a longer time and shoot handhold, and that's quite convenient, of course, in particular in lower light. The build quality of the lens is just fantastic, to say it in one word. It's solid and robust like a tank. It's weather sealed. If you look at the zoom ring here, very smooth but significant resistance, so exactly how I want it. The same applies to the focus ring here. And of course the lens is weather sealed in the same way as the SL2 camera body, so you can shoot this under rough environment. Is a very robust combination if you go out and shoot in nature with this camera lens combo. The autofocus system of the lens in combination with the autofocus system of the Leica SL2 works reasonably well. It's not the fastest in the world, but has a reasonable performance. And Leica calls the autofocus system in this 90 to 280 millimeter lens a dual synchro drive. What I want to do is playing quickly with it. So in the settings I have autofocus continuous, I have here face and body detection, and then let's see if this works in the way I would expect it to work. So first of all, let's focus here on the background. Let's get the focus field visible. Background sharp, fine, a lens in the foreground. A bit hunting, but now it's sharp. Let's look at the model here oh, it jumps immediately to the face, you see that, and it also hits immediately the focus on the face. Quite nice, so that works very well. I can now go into 280 millimeter and then it still recognizes the face of my model, but I cannot get it sharp. It actually hunts because the minimum focusing distance at the 280 millimeter focal length setting is 1.4 meter, and my De Witcher model here is not fully 1.4 meter away. What I can try to do is I can try to focus on Darth Vader here, and then it actually recognizes the face and I can take the shot. So in this way I think autofocus performance you get with this lens is reasonable, not the fastest in the world, but it works very well and very reliable. If the autofocus has been found, it sits where it's supposed to sit. Photo shooting with Sabrina is always fun, and she's serious in posing, but you saw at the end of the clip I just showed that it is also a lot of fun working with her. And I want to start actually and want to only focus on a few images here with two images where I missed the shot. And there were not many of them, but I want to show a couple of them. And one of them is here. If you look at that and go to 100% crop, you see that I wanted to have focus on the left-hand eye of Sabrina, but the focus was actually sitting on the right-hand eye. And that can happen from time to time. Here is another example where this happened. Let me go in here. You see here also the right-hand eye is pinpoint sharp, in particular the eyelashes here, and the left-hand eye where I wanted the focus to sit was not really sharp. But in general, face detection and body detection, in particular if you have updated to the newest firmware on the Leica SL2, is working quite well with that 90 to 280 millimeter lens. And in many cases, the images are mind-blowingly sharp. Let me go into one here, for instance. So this is the normal perspective. This is the 100% crop. This is incredibly sharp, right? This shot was taken as an aperture of f4, so is the widest open you get at 280 millimeter. And an ISO of 100 and 1/250 seconds. And if you look at that, incredibly sharp. And that actually is the case in almost all images I have here. If you look into it, super sharp, super crisp, colors nicely rendered on the lens. And in general, this lens is really performing. I'm not showing here action and sports photography. I really wanted to look into beauty and portrait. I'll show a couple of other images in a moment. But the sharpness of the lens and the way it's working with the Leica SL2 body is really, really good. And I had absolutely nothing to complain when working with that lens on the Leica SL2. Where the lens also really shines on the Leica SL2 is in astrophotography. And I posted a video quite some time back on that topic, and I will link it down below in the info box. And here you see a pinpoint sharp image of Orion Nebula, which is a diffuse nebula situated in the Milky Way, south of Orion's belt, by the way, in the star constellation of Orion. It's one of the brightest nebula and is actually even visible to the naked eye in the clear night sky. And yes, last but not least, you can shoot sports and action with that lens, and I did it in the past, As I said in the autofocus section of this video, it's not the fastest autofocus in the world, but typically it works, and if you can live with a few wasted images, you are well off using that lens on the Leica SL2 for sports and action. I remember a series of questions in comments on my channel where people asked me and said, why did you never review the 90 to 280mm SL lens if you have spent so much time with the 24 to 90mm? And I didn't have a good answer to that question. What I wanted to do now is delivering that video, showing you the lens, showing you sample images, showing you the performance, and that I love this lens shooting on my Leica SL2, and I hope this video was useful for you. If you liked that video, don't forget to drop me a thumbs up. Stay tuned on my channel, there's always more to come. Thanks for watching, stay safe and healthy, and of course, peace out.